Check it out! It's the Laugh to Learn podcast! What is going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 12 of the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a comedic spin on the goings-on in the world. I come to you each and every week from the Great White North on Tuesday evening, which it is right now. It's kind of late afternoon, almost evening, Eastern time, fresh for download to listen to at work Wednesday morning, or perhaps as you lay in bed going to sleep, or, it's great love making talking, You can make love to my voice. Not literally, that'd be a little strange, but while my voice is talking. Either way, everyone around the world can listen to me each and every Tuesday evening Eastern Standard Time, which is New York Standard Time and Toronto Standard Time. Shout out East Coast, best coast. This podcast comes to you ad-free, and all that I ask is for you to subscribe on any podcasting platform, or if you're listening over on YouTube, and then share it with someone. Tell your friends about it, either in person or over social media, and that is all that I ask to get the word out there. Now, this week is a very special week because, of course, in just a few hours, it is Game 7 between my Toronto Maple Leafs and the not-so-appealing Boston Bruins. So, I have set a timer, and this episode will be at most 30 minutes long. It's going to be super short so that I can be assured that it is uploaded and functioning before the game, and you can be assured a quick 30 minutes in and out. This will be a great episode to share with your friends, but I'm not writing any jokes ahead of time, so it might not be funny at all, might not be really what I do every week, but still a good way to share a quick, short podcast to get people into it. Now, because of the short nature of this episode, I've decided to try a little experiment. So I've pushed what I wrote about for this week to next week, and I've decided to just give myself a topic and to start talking about it. So it'll be similar to my rants at the end of episodes. This will be, unlike those, though, this will be completely unedited, so you can hear my thought process as I go through it in real time, and I have no idea what I'm going to say or where I will end up, but if I start jumping topics in a rant, normally I'll hit pause or whatever, stop recording, jump back, delete that section, and then go back into what the topic was. And with this, if I start switching topics and jumping around, I'm just going to leave it. But the only one rule is that I will record until I've either run out of things to say, which is probably unlikely, but you never know, or the timer goes off, telling me that I've rambled on for 25 minutes. I have a few other topics that I can just jump into, like if I start on this and I only have like 5 or 10 minutes of something to say, I always have things that I want to talk about. So I'm setting the timer right now. Now, because I'm trying something new, your feedback is always appreciated, and I always love to hear from you guys, even if it's just to say hello. And after a special podcast like this, it's kind of extra special. So once again, we're recording until I've either run out of things to say or until I've rambled on for 25 minutes. So I'm going to cue that little guitar, and then I'm going to jump into my rant. So, I have decided, after some conversations this week, and then, again, ultimately sitting at work today, I didn't really know what I wanted to cover, what I wanted to go over, how I wanted to do this shorter episode. But ultimately, I've decided to talk about homelessness, because I feel like if you've been a listener of the podcast for the last few weeks, there are really two topics I think that lead into the concept and the issue of homelessness, and these are two things that I've covered. And then there's a third portion of it, arguably 4 portions that I'll get to in a second. But the two things that I have talked about previously on the show, and again, I have nothing written down. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so hopefully I don't get into forgetting shit, but here we go. The first thing I've covered previously that directly, in my opinion at least, affects homelessness is prison reform. Because right now, we are locking up, as I made clear, it's my opinion, that we are locking up far too many people. The problem with locking someone up is that, especially if it's for anything longer than 1 or 2 weeks, they're losing their jobs. They may even be losing, well, they're likely losing their place of residence. And if they maybe don't have a relationship with family or close friends, or they some people just don't want to go back to those situations. They want to do it on their own. That's a major contributor to people ending up living on the streets, and it's something that we do directly to our citizens, especially, as I mentioned before, when we're talking about people being arrested for things that are, at best, things that are, maybe deserve a fine. When you're arresting people for things like drug use, which is one of these components I'm going to talk about, you pull that person away. Maybe they were a functioning addict, right? They were able to hold some sort of a job. They were able to pay some bills and support their addiction. Well, once you pull them out and put them in prison, if they come out, the first time they use, they're addicted to it right away because, that's the way that drugs work. And now they don't have a job and they don't have a place to live. That you just created a homeless person by arresting them for using drugs in the first place. So originally, you may have had a drug user who was maybe living in some sort of government subsidized housing, or maybe they were just living with like a whole bunch of roommates. They found themselves in some sort of situation. But either way, they were a drug addict who was able to support themselves. By locking that person up for 30 days, you've created someone who can no longer support themselves, who now relies on either the system to support themselves, or they are going to live entirely on the streets. And if they're not in a major city, it's very, very difficult to survive our winters on the streets, right? Outside of, Toronto, Vancouver, maybe Montreal, but it's actually very difficult without a subway system to survive in the winter, unless you're in homeless shelters. So to survive without any funding from anyone else, just living on the streets in Canada, extremely difficult, if at all likely. So you may even be killing that person. Now, I mentioned as well that there are 3 others that I'm going to discuss, 3 other things that impact homelessness, and I think the second would be the way that we tax people. So I talked about putting taxes on, specifically on investment properties, and I seriously think that if we had and this is coming from an accountant, I think right now our tax system is almost improper. And by that I mean, right now we tax people in a way that the more you make, yes, the more you pay, but as a ratio, it ends up converting and going the other way. So up to a certain point, you keep paying more and more and more taxes, and then you become wealthy enough where you pay less and less and less and less taxes, right? So there's little motivation for people to move up. And it's a very well-known statistic. I don't know what the number is in Canada, but in the U.S., it's that the average American can't afford a $500 cash emergency, right? And I'm sure that's true in Canada. There's no way that it's not. So, and maybe we'd have to do the conversion. So, $500 US, let's say a 650 Canadian dollar emergency. Most Canadians, more than half, could not afford $650 to, fix something on their car, couldn't afford some sort of bill that came in unexpectedly that they needed to pay. And the way that we tax people makes it very difficult because a lot of people struggle every year. Right now it's April. That's our tax season here as well as in the States. It may be different in whatever country you're listening from, but around tax season, like, people freak out because they genuinely don't know how much money they're going to owe. And they don't know what to do, right? If I have bills to pay and I genuinely don't know if at the end of the year I'm going to owe more money, maybe the government will owe me money, but I have no idea until I file. That's really, really, really difficult. It makes it difficult to plan, especially for people who struggle with those sorts of things, with that sort of thought process, planning ahead and finances. Maybe they don't, a lot of people don't understand it. So the idea that we tax people in an unpredictable manner, and I don't mean unpredictable to the super intelligent people who created the complicated system and the ones who follow through with the complicated system. In Canada, it's the CRA, and the U.S., it's the IRS. The CRA and the IRS both, all of their employees understand taxes. So they're not going to, and even politicians who are proposing tax law changes don't understand, they don't understand taxes. They just don't. You have to leave it to the experts. And I bet you a lot of the experts, actually, I know that a lot of the experts would tell you that it's very, 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 very complicated. I have friends who do it that spend 4, 5, 6 hours every week learning new legislation. Or someone will come to them with a tax problem, and they're like, oh yeah, man, I think you might be screwed. They'll ask 1 or 2 people, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's some strange rule that you didn't know existed that'll help. Right? So I know it may sound kind of strange and a little bit far-fetched, but, how could the way that we charge taxes affect homelessness? Well, someone who's making under $10,000 a year doesn't have to pay taxes in Canada, but anything above that, including money you get from the government, you have to pay taxes on that money. And a lot of people are who collect government income are above $10,000 a year. You can't live in Canada on less than that. It may be a little bit higher now. That's what it was like, 10,005 or 600 when I was in school. It may be a little bit higher than that now because it goes up every year. But there's a ton of people who are paying taxes entirely on government income. And then at the end of the year, they owe money, and they don't understand why, right? And then, it's April 1st, or I guess it'll be May 1st. You just had to pay this big, fat check to the government, or you're going to default on that and go to prison, right? It's this whole circle. So you're either going to not pay your landlord or you're going to not pay the government. No matter what, you're losing your house. Because eventually the government's going to come and arrest you. Or you don't pay your landlord so that you can pay the government, and then you lose your house. And even your landlord might be government subsidized. You'll still lose that house. You can't use the excuse, well, I had to pay the government. They'll be like, well, I don't give a fuck. Who cares? You didn't pay me. I'm the one that matters. And then the government will tell you the same thing. I don't care if you had to pay them. You didn't pay me, and that's all that matters. So it's sort of a vicious cycle. But as I said, I've already covered those two, and what I really want to get into here is the idea of addiction, because it's something that I just read a report on the CBC that was all about how many Canadians are homeless in a given year. They just redid the survey. It was originally done in 2013, and they've kind of updated some of the statistics, although most have remained consistent, which is really unfortunate. But the number right now of Canadians in a year who are in a homeless shelter at some point throughout the year is 150,000. And on any given night, there are 30,000 Canadians homeless, the majority of which are males between the ages of 22 and 55. Now, in talking with someone who volunteers at a homeless shelter right now and has volunteered at several, there's one consistent thing, and shelters both male and female. Other than we have certain shelters that are meant for women who suffered abuse at the hands of a male, usually domestic violence. Other than those shelters, because that is a specific scenario that I think, I mean, how can you talk negatively about that if you're in that scenario? Yes, maybe that's the only time that I would say it's a good thing that you became homeless, because you were being beaten at home and you needed to be hidden somewhere, you and your children or whatever. Yeah, we need to have a place for you to go. You'll be considered homeless, but we'll help you get back on your feet. Okay. But the number one consistent thing, men and women in regular, as I said, like non-domestic violence homeless shelters, just a regular homeless shelter, is addiction. They give out tons of pipes and needles every single day, tons. They drive around and hand them out. Even in the city I'm in, they do it. I know someone who does it. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. And now, I'm not going to discuss whether it's addiction that leads to homelessness or homelessness that leads to addiction, because I think it's irrelevant. The problem really is that right now, the Ontario government recently cut funding for safe injection sites. They recently cut funding for education on drug use in schools. They've pivoted a lot. I don't know if you've noticed, but we're still seeing just as many drinking and driving commercials. However, we're also now seeing an increased number of driving high commercials and commercials on safe alcohol and safe drug use, marijuana use, I should say. We're not seeing commercials on safe drug use. They used to have this prescription drug campaign. It was running for years. It's gone now because suddenly smoking weed is legal, and they're like, oh, we need to tell people how to smoke weed. No, you fucking don't. You don't need to tell us how to smoke weed. You don't need to tell us how to drink. What you need to do, and stop putting out commercials because no one watches TV anymore. Put ads on YouTube maybe, but like stop paying for commercials. It's absolutely ridiculous. That's just a pet peeve on the side. But what you need to start doing is pumping money into people on the ground, into these homeless shelters. These are legitimate numbers for the costs of a television commercial, is like $250,000. Take that money and put it into 2 or 3 homeless shelters. $50,000 a shelter to get a professional, right? $50,000 a year would pay for someone to work for a full year at a shelter and teach them, help them, like a psychologist or a therapist. There's shelters I know of that do this. It's just very expensive. And the problem is when the government's cutting their funding, for one, and number two, spending what little funding is left on commercials teaching people who are not addicts how to use the substances that they choose to use recreationally, such as marijuana and alcohol, you're forgetting about all of the people using substances that actually kill them, substances that actually lead directly to homelessness, right? That's kind of dumb if you think about it, because homelessness every year in Canada costs $7.05 billion with a B. That's $7.05 billion every single year. And that's the cost of running shelters, providing social services, and paying for health care and corrections. That's absolutely disgusting. It's disgusting. $7 billion. And instead, you've decided to cut funding. I know there are people who are against safe injection sites. Again, this is kind of a rant. I'm not going to talk about statistics on safe injection sites. I kind of know them, but not well enough to actually just talk about them here. If you don't know what it is, first of all, it's basically a building or a room you can go into where there are people who are trained to identify when you're overdosing. They have naloxone kits, which will buy your body enough time for an ambulance to show up and help you. What it really does is it allows you to come in. You tell them what drugs you're using, so they know what to look for. We're not talking about people coming indoors to smoke weed. These are real drugs, and it's a no judgment facility, and people don't die. Okay, when Vancouver introduced these, their death rate on the street from overdoses plummeted. The same thing happened in Ottawa. Why we're not funding these is absolutely mind-blowing. I can tell you actually exactly why it is. It's because people think, I don't want to give a drug addict a place to get high. Sorry, man, but it has nothing to do with you. They go in this building where you never have to be in your entire life. You do not have to walk in there. You don't have to have anything to do with it. They get high, they fucking chill for a bit, and then they come out and they feel good. Do you know what happens otherwise? And I know everyone likes to live in a bubble. Everyone likes to live in a bubble. Okay? But when you're friends with people who work in these industries and you're walking through the mall and they can point someone out and be like, oh, I know that guy. He's an addict. Oh, fuck, he's tripping right now. Most people would not recognize that. And I'm talking about walking through a very populated mall. And there's like the dude, and you look at him like, holy fuck, you're right, he is. Because you just block it out. But when you're around it, you see it. You see it all the time, everywhere. I see it everywhere. People tripping out. And I'll even point out to people and be like, oh yeah, look at that guy, he's fucked. And they'll be like, oh, maybe he's drunk. No, man, that's not fucking... That ain't alcohol that's making him act that way. Alcohol doesn't make you fucking rock back and forth and moving your hands like you're doing the fucking wave waiting for some aliens to come down and fucking give you a kiss. It's real, and it's everywhere. And you can tell yourself that it's not and that it's not a problem. You can tell yourself that it'll never be your problem, but I promise you, I absolutely promise you, if you close your eyes to it, it'll slap you in the fucking face. Because this happens to, like, the good kids. Like, you can have perfect children that you raised to be perfect little angels. They went to church or temple or whatever the hell every Friday or Saturday or Sunday, whatever day your denomination of religion chooses to celebrate. And then one day, they're really struggling in university. And someone's like, yo, man, if you take this pill, it'll let you study better. Because everyone listening who's been to university has probably been offered some sort of ADHD pill or speed or something like that to get them through a study session. Because it's everywhere. And guess what? A lot of the smart kids are taking it. And then it's very easy to go from that to something else, to something else, to something else, because you're already just you're buying pills from someone, taking them, they help you study. Then you're at a party and you're not having a good time, and someone's like, yo, man, take this pill and you're going to have a fucking great time. It's a little bit of Molly. It's fucking nothing. Yeah, and you have a great time that night. And then it escalates. That's how it happens. No one wakes up one morning and goes, yeah, heroin, that looks fucking good. That's never, like, I shouldn't say never happened, but I've never heard of it happening. I know a few different people that use heroin. None of them literally went from smoking weed and drinking to waking up one day and being like, yeah, I'm going to heat up this black tar substance on a spoon, fill it into a syringe, take a needle, shove it in my arm, and get high on it. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen that way. So you really, really have to open your eyes to it. Safe injection sites save lives, and we're cutting them. And now, what ends up happening is people become homeless when they're addicted, not necessarily because they can't afford the drugs they're using. Because believe it or not, you can actually get drugs very cheap. It's very, very inexpensive. They also tend to not become homeless because they lost their jobs due to the drugs. There are a lot of functioning addicts that use every day. You would have no idea. I've literally learned that someone who I was good friends with was a functioning addict. And the first time that I saw him using, I was like, holy shit. I had no idea. And I told him, I was like, man, I had no idea. And he just said, yeah, like, it's been like this for like 2 or 3 years. 2 times a day, like, I have to get high, and I've slowed down a lot, but, you know, I have to. Or else, literally, I'll die. Because you can't just stop using a lot of these drugs, well, any of them really, your heart will stop. Because your body chemically actually relies on them. Which is, like, a lot of people just don't understand drugs. They think like, oh, you're an addict, just stop using. It doesn't work that way. You can't just stop using because your heart then stops beating. Then you die. Okay? Drugs don't always kill you from an overdose. They can also kill you because you stopped using. That's the way it works. So, I think safe injection sites are super important because... Oh, sorry, I was getting off track there. The reason that people become homeless using drugs, as I said, not because they can't afford to pay for their bills and their drugs, not because they lost their job because they were always getting high. It's typically because of the judgment around it, that they don't want anyone to know they're using because of how cliche it is. And it's an honest, like, I view it, I know a lot of people don't, I've had this argument before, I view it as a mental illness. I view addiction as a mental illness, as someone who needs serious help, that we can provide that help for them for a relatively low cost, especially if we did it en masse, right? But because of the stigma around it, no one wants you to know that they're an addict. So what they do is they end up stop hanging out with their friends, stop hanging out with roommates, stop seeing their family, and they only hang around other addicts. And then they start going to places with other addicts they probably shouldn't go. They stop coming home because they go on binges. That's when they stop paying their bills. An addict who's able to use with their roommates isn't going to lose their house. Or an addict whose roommates know they use, which I've had before, they're not going to lose their house because they can essentially openly use in their apartment or in their house or whatever it is, and they're not going to have someone breathing down their neck yelling at them because of it. I didn't love the fact that I lived with someone who was using crack cocaine. Wasn't one of the most exciting points in my life, but it happened. Right? And when we found out, we didn't say this can't happen. We didn't call the cops. We weren't really none of us were really friends with this individual, so we didn't really I really didn't care. It wasn't impacting my life at all. He was just doing it. We found out. It was like, okay, whatever, man, go do your thing. But people who aren't in that scenario, who get screamed and yelled at and bitched at and complained at, and they don't get the help they need, they just get screamed and yelled at, they are the ones who end up on the streets. Because they have to leave the house because the people are going to call the cops on them. And, of course, taking you back to prison reform, if someone's a heroin or a crack cocaine addict, we don't say to them, man, we're going to send you to get help. No, we say, we're going to put you behind bars, and hopefully you'll fucking straighten up, and when you come out, you better not fucking use any more drugs, or you're coming back here for a longer period of time. To me, that does not make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Now, I'm going to take you back to that number, that there are, on any given night, 30,000 Canadians that are homeless. 30,000. That is insane. 30,000 on any given night. And we really, 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 really need to fix that. I live in a rural area, and there are, basically any window you look out of in my house, you can see a neighbor's house out of one window, and they're kind of far away. The rest, you look out, you either see trees or grass or the highway. You can't see houses. When I walk my dog, I go back through the woods. Recently, literally in the past year, there's a large population, large for the area I'm in at least, of homeless people that live in the forest. There's Tent City or whatever they call them. There's one right near my house, right behind my house. There's one in a federal park, which the federal government gave away, and they gave it to a native population, and there are a bunch of homeless people that then moved in. There's a baseball diamond down the road from me. If you walk 10, 15 feet behind that, you'll find a whole bunch of homeless people living in tents. It's fucked. We need to fix it. We absolutely need to fix it. And it's one of those things, if you get a chance to speak with politicians, bring this up, because it's an issue that the way I look at it is, these are people who don't have a voice. They don't vote. They have no fixed address. They're allowed to vote, but they don't. And we need to be the voice for these people. We need to give homeless people a chance. And the fourth part of this that I really didn't get into was mental illness. Addiction, as I said, I believe is a mental illness, but there's that whole other component, and I'm now running out of time. Clearly, this is something that I can do quite easily, talk for half an hour. Holy. But yeah, to wrap it up, any chance you get to influence someone with power to make a decision that would benefit the less fortunate is, in my opinion, the right thing to do. These conversations have to be had because it's very easy for us all to just ignore it. But like every day when I'm driving home from work, I see, I can count them, 1, 2, 3 homeless people. So I go through 1, 2, 3, well, really 2 highway, like on-ramp and off-ramp. There's a homeless person begging for money at both of those, and 1 set of lights in the middle of the town every day. And I can tell you what the dude looks like and where he is going to be, what corner he'll be standing on. I can probably tell you exactly what his sign will say every single day. And then they scatter through. That kind of rotates the other traffic lights that I come to, with whether or not there will be someone begging for money on the corner. Now, I'm not someone who generally donates to people sitting on the street corner. I think we need to, as I said, put money into homeless shelters. Go and volunteer at the soup kitchen. Donate to a soup kitchen. Donate food, donate time, donate clothing to the city that I live in. There's a thrift store that's meant for homeless people, and you can get like a suit for like $20 if you have a job interview. That's the sort of thing that like we really, really need to support. Okay, either way, I need to get this up before the game starts. And yeah, so let me know what you thought about this, and thank you all for listening. Remember, this podcast is ad-free, and all I ask is that you share it with your friends and family, subscribe on any podcast app or YouTube, and tell your friends about me each and every week. Remember, every single Tuesday. Please give me any and all feedback on this experimental episode. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you want me? Do you love me? That's a Drake song. Either way, hit up www.laughtolearnpodcast.com. Go to the contact section, and you can send me an email directly to my phone there, or you can hit me up on Instagram or on Twitter. Both handles can be found in the description for this podcast, either on YouTube or on your podcasting platform, whether that be Spotify, Podbean, which is my home, iTunes, any other podcasting app, Podcast Addict. There's a whole bunch of them out there. Apple Podcasts. No matter what it is, you can find my information in the description. So thank you all as always. And don't forget, we are only a week away from another episode.